Is Buddhism an atheistic religion? Many people will give you a confident and emphatic yes in answer to this question. We have to be careful, though. Very often people are telling us what they want it to be, but in this class we're concerned with what is, and because we're taking a historical approach, we're concerned with what has been in the many previous centuries also. Viewed historically, it turns out this is an exceedingly difficult question to answer. It's instructive to look at how one scholar wrestles with this question. Bernard Farr, in his book Unmasking Buddhism, says, quote, "Buddhism, it is often said, has no use for God, let alone gods." Certainly early Buddhism did not recognize a creator God, like Hinduism or the monotheistic religions of the West. However, the situation changed with the development of the Mahayana school. The numerous Buddhas and Bodhisattvas constituted a real pantheon of divinities, all with different virtues and functions, end quote. And a bit later he says, quote, "While some see the, quote, historical Buddha as simply the founder of a resolutely atheist Buddhism, for the majority of Buddhists he is the most eminent character in a vast cosmopolitan pantheon, and as such is an important object of worship. Is Buddhism therefore atheist, monotheist, or even polytheist?" End quote. Again he says, quote, "Buddhism could be described as a polytheistic religion in the sense that it recognizes the relative existence, in other words, existence at the level of conventional truth or conventional reality, of numerous gods who act as mediators or even saviors, becoming objects of worship. However, given that the ultimate reality is that of the Buddha, Buddhism could also be described as monotheistic. Finally, given that this Buddha is not a god in the Western sense of the term and is considered to be either the first to have understood this ultimate reality, according to early Buddhism, or another name for this ultimate reality, according to Mahayana, Buddhism could also, in a pinch, be described as atheistic. Clearly these rigid categories are not appropriate for describing this complex phenomenon and its fluid beliefs and practices." End quote. I think what his twisting and turning shows us is that we have to be really careful how we define our terms. I'll give you my own answer, and this is not a standard textbook answer. These are my own thoughts as a philosopher of religion. The basic answer is yes, Buddhism is an atheistic religion, unless the Buddha is supposed to be a perfect self. A perfect self is a being which is the greatest being there could be, a being which is all-knowing, all-powerful, completely good, eternal, causeless, and so on. Monotheism is belief in a perfect self. You could say belief in a perfect God. Atheism, properly defined, is the denial of that. It's the denial that there's a perfect self. So you can be an atheist and also believe in a bunch of deities, a bunch of gods that aren't perfect selves. So that's my basic answer. Now, do they think that he's a perfect self? Well, in Asia, many Buddhists seem to think of the Buddha in this way. They offer devotion to him, what Hindus call bhakti. We should hasten to add that modernist Buddhism and Buddhism as it's understood in the West, nowadays, in recent times, they almost always vigorously deny the existence of any perfect creator to whom we owe worship and obedience. This is a big selling point of Buddhism nowadays, that in Buddhism one can have religion and spirituality without God. And so clearly you can be a Buddhist, and many nowadays are Buddhists who are atheists. They don't believe in a perfect self or in a perfect creator. And many of them also don't believe in any other kind of supernatural beings. However, for most of Buddhist history, Buddhism was spreading into various polytheistic contexts. Buddhism was spreading into areas that already had their own pantheon of deities. And unlike the monotheistic religions, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism didn't say, there are no such things, forget about that, there's only one ultimate or there's only one God. It didn't say that. What they did was they just located the gods in samsara. They didn't deny the existence of the traditional deities then. So for instance, the traditional Indian deities. So you'll see Brahma and Indra and sometimes other entities from the Hindu pantheon showing up in Buddhist sources and in Buddhist art from that part of the world. Those beings are real, and for all we care, they might help you out with various things, but they're not going to get you the cure. Thing is that they too need the cure. They are trapped in samsara. they are trapped in the reincarnation cycle. Traditionally then, Buddhism sort of takes on pre-existing religion. It just assimilates the pantheons that it encounters and then allows people to have an interest in them, even to worship them and to serve them, but it makes them irrelevant, one could say, to salvation. Is the Buddha a god? They never describe the Buddha as a god because gods are all in samsara. All the devas, to use the old Sanskrit term, are in need of salvation themselves. They don't call the Buddha a god. However, again, it seems that many Buddhists consider him to be a super self, the kind of being you can talk to, the kind of being you can worship, the kind of being you can call upon, the kind of being you can take refuge in. So can you be a Buddhist and believe in no gods at all? Yes, you definitely can. Can you be a Buddhist and believe in something that's very much like a monotheistic God, although it's not the creator? Yes, you can. Can you be a Buddhist and have a whole pantheon of deities? You may not call them gods, you may call them Buddhas, but, they're just like other pantheons in how they function, what role they play in the religion. Yes, you can. So the reality is messy. Messy but interesting. I was talking just now about Buddhism as actually practiced, of course, mostly by Asians in Asia. Sometimes Western converts to Buddhism aren't all that familiar with the Asian practice and reality of Buddhism, but they become interested in Buddhism by way of philosophy, by the way of reading books and reading the Buddhist scriptures or modern Buddhist writers. If we go beyond the level of popular understanding to the level of philosophy, then a lot of Mahayanists hold that there is a unique ultimate reality, which we can, as it were, discover underneath the physical world. This thing is inconceivable. It can't really be understood. No concept applies to it. It's ineffable. And because of that, then it's not really thought of properly as a self. If it was a self, it would be conceivable. It wouldn't be ineffable. And this ultimate reality goes by many names in Mahayana philosophy. It can be called the Buddha nature. It can be called the Dharma body of the Buddha. It can just be called the Dharma. Sometimes in Zen it can be referred to as your true self, and so on. So how many Buddhas are there then? Well, if the Buddha is the ultimate, then there's going to only be one of those. Or if the Buddha is the man who started it all, then it's going to be one of those. But what about all these celestial beings that are the object of worship, that are depicted in so many statues and pictures in various kinds of Buddhism? How many of those are there? There isn't a standard answer. There are different groupings of them. Probably the best answer is that there are countless of them. There's no upper limit to the number of Buddhas. Now, on this question of what we mean by a Buddha, we have to discuss this Eastern Buddhist doctrine of Trikaya, of the Buddha's three bodies. The Dharmakaya, or the truth body, is that indescribable ultimate reality I was just talking about. This is the Buddha as he or as it really is in itself. It's the Buddha looked at objectively. It's not an appearance. It's not something that exists in our minds. This is what the Buddha at the deepest level really is. Second, there's the enjoyment body of the Buddha, the Sambhogakaya. This is a celestial form or body in which he inhabits his Buddha field. So if every Buddha has a Buddha field or a Buddha land or a Buddha realm, then as the Buddha exists there, that body is the Sambhogakaya. Third, there's the emanation body, the Nirmanakaya. This is the Buddha's earthly body. The interesting thing about this is it's not really real. It's a projection, an emanation. It's an illusion. Now this is really astounding when you think about it. If someone says to you, in Buddhism, the Buddha is just a man, well, if by Buddha we mean Gautama, this guy who walked around in BC times, who ate and drank and taught and lived and died, if that's what we mean by the Buddha, that was an illusion. It was a projection, ultimately, from the Dharmakaya. It was a projection for the purpose of instructing ignorant human beings in the Dharma and the message of Buddhism. So yes, some Buddhists consider the Buddha to be just a person, a human being like me or you. But those in Mahayana who accept this three bodies doctrine view the historical, physical Buddha as an illusion which emanates out of this transcendent being. Some scholars would describe these as levels of the Buddha, or dimensions, with the truth body being the deepest and the emanation body being the shallowest. And here's where the other Buddhas fit in. that we've already mentioned and that we'll look at also later in this lecture. The other Buddhas, for instance, Amitabha, who dwells in his own pure land, the Western Paradise, that would be thought of in most cases as a Sambhogakaya, as an enjoyment body of the Buddha. So really, he is a manifestation of the one Buddha. Same would be true, presumably, of the other Buddhas. And insofar as they manifest on earth, those would be emanation bodies of the original Buddha. So Amitabha as physically manifest or manifest in a vision would really be an appearance, a projection of the one Buddha. In our next segment, some core doctrines the Buddha teaches in the Pali Canon.